Hey everyone, this is Max at MaxCTCG. Thank you for joining me in another video. So in this video, we're going over the Fire King structure deck. So this can be a basics guide for beginner players really, and we're going to focus on all the cards in the structure deck that are worth playing, their synergies with the deck. We'll discuss different ways you can upgrade the deck from a structure deck. Look at some basic hand traps that are great in a lot of decks that are pretty cheap right now. Different budget, engines you can include, like Dogmatika or Tri-Brigade. And Tri-Brigade has done actually really well recently. And then we can also look at the more expensive cards that are going to be really good moving forward and are still solid in the deck now with the Sinful Spoils engine. We'll talk about new cards that are coming out like Bonfire and Maze of Millennia that just dropped. And then we'll also look at cards from Photon Nightmare, like Snake Eye Populace and the Promethean Princess. And we'll kind of discuss through these different synergies, look at different options for side deck cards based off what structure deck budget players will have options to, and then how you can upgrade those cards and what might be worth playing depending on different situations in the meta. And then also go through different side deck options you can consider playing as well. And that'll kind of round out the video. It's definitely going to be a longer one because we're going to be going through all the cards more in depth and really explaining them. So if you're more of a competitive player, you're familiar with a lot of these cards and how they actually work and their basic synergies, I'd move to the next section of the video where we go through the deck profile, discuss ratios and synergies from a deck perspective, not like individual card perspectives. Next, we'll kind of go into some side deck options. So we have the side deck cards that are going to be in the structure deck first, and then we'll go into options that you can upgrade into and even some more like budget alternatives and discuss the differences between those, and also discuss some cards on why they might see play and what you might want to do to adjust to these cards. So when it comes to the structure deck, your options are kind of limited, so you have to be careful on what you put in. First card we'll talk about is Solemn Judgment. When a monster would be summoned or a spell trap is activated, pay half your life points, negate that summoner activation, and if you do, destroy that card. So it's just a great card for when you're deciding to go first. It pretty much can go in no matter what, as long as you're not close to time, because you don't want to pay half your life points and not be able to do damage. If you have enough time on the board, you can negate any major card, any card that's sided in to counter you, any card that's part of your opponent's engine that they're going to play to be able to make plays. This is a good card to be able to side in, and it comes in the structure deck, so it's a decent option for going first. Next, you have Dark Hole, destroy all monsters on the field. This can be somewhat playable going first. You might be able to make plays off benefiting off your cards being destroyed, but this is mostly going to be a going second card to just kind of board wipe your opponent's field, and especially if they're not playing any forms of negation like we talked about with Savage Dragon and Barone. This can just board wipe, which is nice. Now we also have Alpha the Master of Beast. So this cannot be normal summoned or set, must be special summoned from your hand, while the total attack of all monsters your opponent controls is more than that of all the monsters you control. Target any number of beasts, beast warrior, or winged beast monsters you control, return them to the hand, and return face-up monsters your opponent controls to the hand equal to the number of cards. Return to the hand, also rest this turn. Alpha Master Beast control cannot attack directly. You can only use each effect of Alpha the Master Beast once per turn. Alpha is a nice going second card and does have synergy with the deck since you're playing beast, beast warrior, and winged beast. So as a one card play, you get to return one card and you have a 3000 attack point monster, but you can't attack directly. If you have more Fire Kings on the field, and you can then use Island to maybe pop them or Kieran to pop them, and you'll get cards back into rotation on the field, you can return multiple monsters on the field to the hand. So a decent card for the deck, but again, only can be played going second. We have Herald of the Abyss, 1500 life points, and declare one monster type and one attribute. Your opponent must send one face-up monster with the declared type and attribute from their field to the grave, if possible. For the rest of this turn, your opponent cannot activate the effects on monsters that are sent with that name. You only activate one Herald of the Abyss per turn. So you might be looking at this and going, well, it doesn't seem that great of a removal card, it just removes one card. The reason why this is being played is because of Purrely. So Purrely have a card called Purrely Noir. So this card says you have 5 or more materials. This card is unaffected by your opponent's activated effects while it has these materials attached to it. Now it does also have an effect where you can detach 2 materials from this card to target one card your opponent controls or in the grave, placed on the bottom of the deck. So that can be a nice counter to some of your graveyard cards that might be waiting to trigger to come back, like Ponyx or Barong. But by using this effect, they have to remove materials, and as long as they stay over 5, this card's unaffected. So Herald of the Abyss is a nice way to get rid of this card. Now you might be like, well, why? Because it's unaffected, but wording is very important. It affects the player and not the card. So the player actually has to choose the card they send, and if the only card they have is Purrely Noir, they have to send it to the graveyard. Now, with the Purrely setup, without going too in depth, there are ways for them to recover resources and make plays, so it's not an auto win card, but is a way of removing an unaffected monster that's pretty good. They could also play around this card though, because if they play their a quick play spell to summon this Purrely. They'll have 2 monsters of the same attribute and type, and they could send this instead of the Purrely Noir. So it's not a complete out, but it is a good card that you can play. And if you combine this with cards like Thrust, which did just get a reprint, so it's a little cheaper than it was, you know, you could end up searching this card if they use an effect, and then use that to out the Purrely Noir. So it's something to keep in mind as a good removal card that could be good against a solid deck in the format that you have access to in your structure deck, which is nice. And if you have Thrust, you could access to other cards, including this, to have more versatility. So next we have Onslaught the Fire Kings. This would be a nice card if it didn't have the requirement to let your opponent controls a monster, and that's it. So that unfortunately makes this card really not that great. It says if only your opponent controls a monster, special one from Fire, Beast, Beast Warrior, or Winged Beast from your deck, but its effects are negated and destroyed during the end phase, it would just be like a somewhat of an emergency teleport. It's a card we reference for cards that summon from the deck, but unfortunately the effects are negated and destroyed. But with Fire Kings, it's not as big of a deal that the card's destroyed. This would just be a nice extension card. For the structure deck, I think you could side it going second to have more ways to get to cards and make some plays. You'll maybe get a level 8 out plus one you already have to be able to make the Exceed monster. So it's okay, but I would definitely look to replace this with better cards as you upgrade the deck. And then we have Fencing Fire Ferret. The reason I have this card in is because it can let you win in time. If this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, target one face-up monster your opponent controls, destroy that target, and if you do, inflict 500 damage to your opponent. So this will let you potentially win in time if they have a monster on the field. You can get some burn damage in. It works with Onslaught, it works with Garunix, it works with Fire King Island if you destroy it from hand. So it is just an option to consider with the structure deck. So we have Dogoran the Mad Flame Kaiju. Now the main reason this is used is that you can special summon this card from your hand to your opponent's field in attack position by attributing a monster they control. So this is another way of outing any problematic card. A Barone that negates a card, or Borrowed Savage, any boss monster. This also outs the Purrely Noir because it's just tributing it as a summoning mechanic. So that does not mean that its unaffected effect will work for that. But again, the Purrely deck has a lot of ways to recur resources when their card's removed from the field. So that does make this card something that you'd probably want to kill your opponent that turn. But it's a good general fire removal option for any card. So very cheap and decent card to add in. Kind of get into some cards you can start upgrading with and move away from the structure deck for side deck cards. We have XYZ Encore, so it's a little more specific of a removal card, but it works really well in the deck. So it says target one face-up Exceed monster your opponent controls that has XYZ materials, detach all XYZ monsters from it. If you do, return it to the extra deck. Then if there's a monster card in the graveyard among those detached XYZ materials, special summon as many of those monsters as possible from the graveyard to your opponent's side of the field in face-up defense position. Their levels are reduced by 1 on the field, and card effects cannot be activated in response to this card's activation. So this is another way of removing the Purrely Noir. It's kind of similar to Herald of the Abyss, but instead of affecting the player, it affects the materials. And Purrely Noir does not protect its materials, it only protects itself as a card. So this can remove all the materials from the card and return the Purrely monster. They're still going to get some resources back, but it's a good card for that. And another card that you want to consider playing around is Dweller. So Abyss Dweller is just a generic 2-level 4 monsters. It says while this card is a water material attached, gains 500 attack, but the main thing is once per turn, quick effect, you can detach 1 material from this card. Your opponent cannot activate card effects in the grave. So this will make it so any card that triggers in the graveyard won't work, and this can be a blowout card versus graveyard reliant decks. It has come in and out of formats in the past and will also be good against Fire Kings. So what's nice about XYZ Encore is as turn player, you'll get priority to activate the first card in the draw phase. And this card says, card effects cannot be activated in response to this card's activation. So 1, this takes out Noir, but if your opponent goes into Abyss Dweller and you have XYZ Encore, you can activate this as your first action, target the Abyss Dweller, return it to the extra deck, and your opponent cannot activate the Abyss Dweller, stopping your cards from triggering in the grave that turn. So this pretty much has 2 options and really works well where like the Dogoran contribute the Abyss Dweller, but the Abyss Dweller will still be able to trigger earlier in the phase. Now, if they wait to use it in the main phase, you'll distribute it and they won't activate it. But if they shotgun it in the standby phase or draw phase before you have the option to summon a Dogoran, which they probably will, then they won't be able to play around this card. So it kind of depends how they try to use it, but most of the time, XYZ Encore is going to be the better option for being able to get rid of Abyss Dweller. So next you'll have Droll and Lockbird. Again, a really good blowout card in the side deck, especially for when your opponent is doing a lot of searching. Next we have DD Crow. It says quick effect, you can discard this card to the grave, target one card in your opponent's graveyard, and banish that target. This is good for anything that has a graveyard targeting effect they're trying to reborn or use. This is a great way to remove it. It's also an older card, so it's not a once per turn. So drawing multiple copies of this card versus an Ash Blossom means it can be used. You can use both copies. The same thing with Effect Veiler, similar thing. You can use both copies. So this is a really good card. And if we are seeing a lot of DD Crow being played in the in the side deck or even main deck, you might want to consider having multiple copies of cards. So during Photon Nightmare, some lists in the OCG in Japan that already have these cards have been playing Garunix at 1. And it makes sense from an efficiency standpoint. But if we're seeing a lot of DD Crow, you might want to make sure that some of these cards have at least multiple copies. So at least 2 Garunix. So depending on what's seeing play, we might play multiple copies of this, and you might play 2 Garunix anyway. I don't think it's wrong. It's just a deck building preference and what you're considering when building. Next we have Harpie's Feather Duster. Destroy all spawn trap cards your opponent controls. A really nice blowout versus Fire Kings as well. Sanctuary can only activate when special summon a monster, so this will allow you to wipe the field, but Sanctuary does have a protection effect where field spell would be destroyed by card effect. You can destroy one fire monster in your hand or field instead. So this card will be able to get rid of the Sanctuary, but they'll be able to protect the Fire King Island and then destroy a card triggering effects. So generally a really good mass blowout card, but might not be the best card versus Fire Kings. You also have Lightning Storm. It says if you control no face-up cards, activate one of the effects, destroy all attack position monsters your opponent controls, destroy all spawn trap cards your opponent controls. Kind of like a dual option card that you can either go against the attack position monsters or the spawn trap. So it has that versatility, but it has the restriction of no face-up cards. So a lot of times you need to use it right away in your games or somehow set your monsters or remove them from the field to be able to use it. But again, with the protection from destruction, these types of cards may not be as used this format. You want to look towards like Cosmic Cyclone, which is pay 1,000 life points, target a spell or trap on the field, banish it. So this can go after the Fire King Island or the Sanctuary, which is nice. It can also be used going second to just hit the Sanctuary so they can't special summon the Garunix Eternity high on the Fire Kings. So another really good option for spawn trap removal. And if Cosmic Cyclone is being played, you might want to definitely look into playing multiple Sanctuary, because some people are considering cutting Sanctuary down to 1 just due to how many ways there is to access Ponix moving forward with the Sinful Spoils engine. So another thing to consider, maybe you play 2 instead of 1 or play 2/2. It just kind of depends. Next we have Triple Tactics Talent. So this is a really great card for going first or second. We're playing a lot of hand traps, which this format before was playing, and it looks like we're probably playing a lot of hand traps this format as well. This is a really great way of being able to counter your opponent trying to stop you. Now I like 3 of the cards on this effect, but one of them I think is a little bit unfair, and we might see this card eventually get hit because of it, either limited or banned or semi-limited. Something will probably happen to this card in the future. If your opponent activates a monster effect during the main phase, activate one of these effects, draw 2 cards. So if this is honestly the worst effect that people use, because that means if they're using the draw 2, that means they probably don't have a playable hand and they're trying to get into better cards. Take control of an opponent's monster until the end phase. It's a great way of taking an XYZ monster and making a Zeus on top. We'll go over this card when we get there. Or just any monster to use for link material. You could do a lot for removing different monsters from your opponent's field. And then using those monsters so you don't have to give them back at the end phase. You can look at your opponent's hand and choose 1 card to shuffle into the deck. This is the best card on the effect by far for going first. The take effect is probably the best for going second. So this card, if your opponent hand traps you, you can then play Talons, as long as it's a monster hand trap, and look at your opponent's hand. You can remove another hand trap out of the hand if you want to keep playing and that would have stopped you. You can remove a starter card from their hands, they won't have a way to play. You remove a board breaker card so they can't counter you going second. Plus, the big thing that this does is it lets you gain access to your opponent's hand. So you'll know all the cards in their hand besides what they draw for turn, which will give you really good knowledge of how to play around their hand. So if you have a negate and you're not sure what to use it on, do they have a follow-up, you'll most likely know that if they have the follow-up or not. So the fact that you get hand knowledge with this card is what makes this card really good. And you really, it kind of sucks that going second, trying to stop your opponent from playing, which is objectively more unfair than going first, or going second, since it's so much easier to play going first, you do get punished if they talents you. Next we have Called by the Grave. It says target a monster in your opponent's graveyard, banish it, and if you do, until the end phase of the next turn, its effects are negated, as well as activated effects and effects on the field with the same original name. So this can be good going first and second, it kind of depends on the deck. For the most part, this is used going first when trying to play around hand traps. They try to ash you can negate it. They try to dimension shifter you can negate that card. Now, going second against Fire Kings, if you're playing a mirror match, this actually isn't too bad because you can negate the Barong and banish it so it can't search the Kirin to summon itself on the field during your turn. You can negate the Ponyx, which will make it so even on the following turn, they can't use it even if they get another copy. Plus, it won't go to hand, but they will get the Kirin search. They do the Barong Ponyx search during the standby phase. So if they have another fire monster, they could still get to that board wipe. So you're kind of betting on the fact that they don't have an extra monster to trigger, but could be good longer term. So there are some times in which this can be good going second, but ideally it's mostly used for going first and stopping hand traps. Next we have Belle. So Belle's kind of similar to Ash Blossom. It has 3 really good effects. If your opponent tries to add a card from grave to hand or extra deck, if they try to special summon a monster card from the graveyard, if they try to banish cards from the graveyard. If they try to do any of these things, you can negate that. So if they're trying to special summon from the grave, that can be really useful to negate and stop. So this, I think we could see having more play this format. It's also really good against Labyrinth for stopping Big Welcome. And Labyrinth is getting Transaction Rollback, which is a really good card for the strategy. So we might see that becoming more of a popular pick right now because that came out with Bonfire and Maze of Millennia, just this week. So this might be a card you might want to play in the side deck to hit 2 pretty good matchups. And can also work against Purrely depending on how things are set up. And it does have some pretty good utility, but unlike Ash Blossom, it's a little more specific, not generally main decked unless it's a lot of cards. So most likely to be side decked. And then we have Dimension Shifter. This is generally a blowout card in any deck that can run it against graveyard decks. If you have no cards in your graveyard, quick effect, you can send this card from your hand to the grave until the end of the turn, and any card sent to this graveyard is banished instead. So some decks can kind of play under this, and they'll play it even if it hurts them because it hurts their opponent more. Other decks can completely abuse this card, sometimes even cycling the card back to the hand to then use again because they have no cards in the grave to stop banishing for 2 more turns. So really good card if you can play it, and we'll see eventually if this card ever gets hit. A really good way of stopping a lot of the graveyard focus decks. We have Soul Release. Target to 5 cards in the graveyard, banish them. So this is a card that's seeing play in the OCG right now that we will probably see play once Phantom Nightmare comes out, because a lot of the Fire King Snake Eye combos, their board is in their graveyard. So by banishing a bunch of these cards, you really remove their follow-up and a lot of their plays. You also have Gravekeeper's Inscription. To start the main phase, 1. Apply one of these effects till the end of your opponent's turn. Neither player can activate card effects in the grave. Neither player can banish cards from the grave, and neither player can special summon monsters from the grave. So again, another way of just saying, as a monster card, it's pretty much an Abyss Dweller, where you can say neither player can activate card effects in the graveyard as you're starting play in the main phase. And that can help turn off some of the cards that people are going to be playing. So something good to consider. You also have Pot of Prosperity. Banish 3 to 6 cards of your choice from your extra deck face down for this turn. After it dissolves, any battle damage taken is halved. Also excavate cards from the top of your deck equal to the number of cards banished. Add 1 excavated card from your hand, place the rest on the bottom of the deck in any order, and only activate 1 Pot of Prosperity per turn. This card's not as good in the Fire King deck. I think once we get the Snake Eye cards, because the deck's so consistent, you don't really need this. But if you are playing more of the budget version, this card was reprinted, so it's only like $3 to $5, so it's a lot cheaper than the $30 to even $100 that it used to be. So it is a nice way of adding consistency. You can either use it as a starting card to add consistency with getting one of your main plays like Ponyx, or you could use it after you do all your searching to try to get to maybe a certain hand trap you need, or a certain floodgate, or board breaker, or something else you need to be able to play. So it has a lot of utility for that reason. It's a really good card. Always wait to see what they banish. If they're only banishing 3, they might not really need the card they're searching for, so it might not be worth negating. If they banish 6, they probably are digging because they need a card to play, so it's a good way to tell what they're using. And make sure to try to remember that your damage is halved. Sometimes that can be forgotten in how long the turns can be, and you will forget this going second, that, oh, I'm trying to OTK, but I don't need to do 8,000 damage, I need to do 16,000 damage. So most likely using this card going second, you're not going to be able to kill that turn. Another card to consider is Sinful Spoils of Subversion Snake Eye. Target 1 face-up monster in the field, place it face up in the owner's spawn trap zone as a continuous spell. So this is a nice Snake Eye card that can be also used as Disruption. So nice thing is with the Sinful Spoils engine, you could use these cards to get to, if you're only playing the main card here just for engine, not going to really get you any disruption. If you do play this card, either side deck it or maybe main deck it, you do have an option where if you draw multiple Sinful Spoils cards, or you don't need the Sinful Spoils because you already have access to Ponics or different cards you're playing, maybe you already have a Bonfire, a way to get to this card with Witch, this gives you a way to be able to search a disruption as well. So it might be a nice flexibility card to consider playing, and it's not bad to draw going second on its own anyway. And then we have Super Poly, another card to just consider going first or second. Can be good for either. It's very good against Manadium, and Manadium was like the combo deck of last format that really didn't get hit at all. So this is a great way to out that board. Even if you don't have Droll, you can maybe play both. But it's not necessarily the greatest into the Fire King deck, even though it's playable. It seems like they can play through it pretty well. We'll have to kind of see if this is getting played. But another really great card, because you can discard a card, fusion someone, fusion monster from your extra deck, using monsters from either field as fusion material. Neither player can activate cards in response to this card's activation, so it's great for potentially removing negates or different cards that would normally negate cards that can't respond. And ideally, you want to usually use both of your opponent's monsters to really plus off of it, because you're discarding a card and using a card. So if you use 2 of their monsters, this plus the discard, it's a 2 for 2. So you go even in card advantage, but because the cards you removed are generally very threatening, it's a huge benefit. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. See you there. And if you want to join and become a patron to support the channel because you like the content I'm making, you can find the links in my video description about page on my YouTube channel or my website. You can see different things that will come with each of the tiers, as well as each tier having a 7-day free trial to try it out and see if you like it before committing financially. Thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you guys in future videos.